The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Andrew Chen stood outside his towering glass office building in downtown Seattle. At 42, he had everything money could buy: a successful tech company, a penthouse overlooking the bay, and more zeros in his bank account than he could count. But something felt empty, just like it had for the past 3 years since his divorce. He loosened his tie and checked his watch. The board meeting had run longer than expected, and now he was late for his coffee appointment. Not that it mattered much, being the CEO meant nobody would dare complain about his timing. As he walked down the busy street, his mind wandered to simpler times, before the IPO that changed everything. The coffee shop was tucked away in a quiet corner, a place he discovered by accident while trying to avoid the paparazzi after his company went public. The bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of freshly ground coffee beans welcomed him. That's when he saw her, his ex-wife, Michelle. She was sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. 3 years had passed, but she looked exactly as he remembered. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still. Neither of them had planned this encounter. The city had millions of people, thousands of coffee shops, and somehow they ended up in the same one at the same time. "Andrew," she said softly, a mix of surprise and uncertainty in her voice. Before he could respond, a small voice piped up from behind her. "Mommy, can I have another cookie?" Andrew's gaze shifted to the source of the voice, a young boy, no more than 5 years old, with jet black hair and dark brown eyes that looked startlingly familiar. The child looked up at him with curiosity, and Andrew felt his heart skip a beat. Those eyes, they were exactly like his father's. His coffee forgotten, Andrew stood frozen in place. The boy's features, the timing, the way Michelle suddenly seemed uncomfortable, it all started to make sense. Questions flooded his mind, but they stuck in his throat. "This is Tommy," Michelle said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son." Andrew's world tilted on its axis. The timing aligned perfectly with their last few months together, before everything fell apart. Before the stress of the company's rapid growth and his obsession with success had driven them apart. Before Michelle had walked away, saying she couldn't live with someone who had replaced his heart with a spreadsheet. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his legs no longer able to support him. Tommy had returned to his coloring book, completely oblivious to the weight of the moment. Andrew watched as the boy carefully selected different crayons, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, exactly the way Andrew did when he was focused. "How?" Andrew started, but Michelle cut him off. "Not here," she said, glancing meaningfully at Tommy. "He doesn't know." The implications of those 3 words hit Andrew like a physical blow. This boy, this bright-eyed child who was so carefully coloring within the lines, could be his son. A son he never knew existed. A son who had spent 5 years growing up without a father, while Andrew had been building his empire of ones and zeros. Memories of his own childhood flashed through his mind, growing up with a single mom, always wondering about the father who had left before he was born. He had promised himself he would never do that to his own child. Yet here he was, having unknowingly repeated the very history he had sworn to avoid. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy, but he might have missed out on the most precious thing of all, watching his own son grow up. The thought made his chest tighten with a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. "We need to talk," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Michelle nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the moment. "I'm staying at the Bluebell Apartments," she said quietly, writing something on a napkin. "Come by at 8. Tommy will be asleep." As if on cue, Tommy looked up from his coloring book and smiled at Andrew, a pure, innocent smile that made his heart ache. "Do you want to see my drawing?" the boy asked, holding up his masterpiece, a somewhat abstract representation of what appeared to be a rocket ship. "I'd love to," Andrew replied, his voice thick with emotion. As Tommy explained his artwork with all the seriousness a 5-year-old could muster, Andrew couldn't help but notice how the boy's eyes lit up when he talked about space and rockets, just like his own did during investor presentations. The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and careful glances, both adults trying to maintain normalcy for Tommy's sake while their minds raced with unspoken words. When Michelle finally announced it was time to leave, Andrew watched them go, feeling like he was watching a part of himself walk away. Standing outside the coffee shop, Andrew looked up at the Seattle skyline, the empire he had built. The glass towers that had once filled him with pride now seemed hollow. All his achievements, all his wealth, what did they really mean if he had missed out on something as fundamental as being a father? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, Andrew realized that his life was about to change dramatically. The next few hours until their meeting would be the longest of his life. He had built his fortune by making quick, decisive moves in the business world, but this would require a different kind of courage altogether. He pulled out his phone to cancel all his meetings for the next day. For once, the company would have to wait. He had more important things to figure out, like how to be a father to a 5-year-old boy who might not even know he needed one. The hours crawled by like years as Andrew paced his penthouse apartment. He had changed his suit 3 times, then finally settled on casual clothes, a simple sweater and jeans. This wasn't a business meeting, after all. This was about something far more important. At exactly 7:55 p.m., he found himself standing outside the Bluebell Apartments. It was a modest building in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like the luxury high-rises he was used to. Through a ground-floor window, he caught glimpses of families having dinner, of normal lives being lived. Lives like the one he could have had. Michelle opened the door before he could knock. She had changed into comfortable home clothes, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. The apartment was small but warm, filled with children's artwork and the unmistakable signs of a happy home. Tommy's toys were neatly arranged in colorful boxes, and a half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table. "He just fell asleep," Michelle whispered, leading Andrew to the kitchen. He was excited about meeting someone new today. He doesn't get to see many men in suits. Andrew's throat tightened as he sat down at the small kitchen table. A child's drawing was stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, another rocket ship, this one labeled, "To the Moon," in wobbly handwriting. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came out more accusatory than he'd intended, and he immediately regretted his tone. Michelle's hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her knuckles turning white. "I found out 2 weeks after I left," she said quietly. "You were in the middle of your company's biggest acquisition. Your face was on every business magazine. The stock price was breaking records." She took a shaky breath. "I called your office 27 times. Your secretary always said you were in meetings. I came to your building 3 times, but security wouldn't let me up. You had made it very clear that your company was your priority." The memory of those chaotic months hit Andrew like a physical blow. He had been so focused on the acquisition, so determined to prove himself, that he had shut out everything else. He had thought Michelle had left because she couldn't handle his success. The truth was far more painful. "The day I finally got through," Michelle continued, "your assistant said you were too busy to deal with personal matters and that all communication should go through your lawyers." She wiped away a tear. "So I decided to handle it on my own. I moved back to my hometown, had Tommy, got a job teaching kindergarten. We made it work." Andrew remembered his assistant at the time, a ruthlessly efficient woman who had since been promoted to VP of operations. She had never mentioned Michelle's calls. Or had she? Those months were a blur of meetings, signatures, and celebrations. "I had a right to know," he said softly, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Yes, you did," Michelle agreed. "But Tommy had a right to a parent who would put him first. Back then, that wasn't you." The truth of her words stung, but Andrew couldn't argue. The man he had been 3 years ago wouldn't have made time for a child. He would have thrown money at the situation, set up a trust fund, hired nannies, scheduled weekly visits that would eventually become monthly, then quarterly. "What made you come back to Seattle?" he asked. "I got offered a position at a progressive school here. Better pay, better opportunities for Tommy." She hesitated. "I didn't think we'd run into you. Seattle's a big city." Andrew looked down the hallway where Tommy slept. "He likes space," he said, remembering the drawings. A small smile crossed Michelle's face. "He's obsessed. He can name all the planets, knows all about the moon landing. Last week, he announced he's going to build rockets when he grows up." Just like I wanted to, Andrew thought. He remembered being 5, drawing rockets in class while other kids drew houses and dogs. His mother had encouraged his dreams until reality, in the form of bills and responsibilities, had forced him to pursue more practical goals. "I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago," Andrew said carefully. "The company, it runs itself now. I've been thinking about stepping back, maybe focusing on our charitable foundation." Michelle studied him carefully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to be part of his life. If you'll let me." "If he'll let me." Andrew leaned forward. "I'm not asking to disrupt what you've built. I don't want to be like my father. I don't want Tommy to grow up wondering." "It's not that simple," Michelle said. "Tommy has a life, a routine. He's happy. I can't just." A small voice interrupted them. "Mommy? I'm thirsty." They both turned to see Tommy standing in the hallway, clutching a worn stuffed astronaut. His dark hair was tousled from sleep, and he blinked in surprise at seeing Andrew. "Hey, spaceman," Andrew said gently. "Remember me from the coffee shop?" Tommy nodded, shuffling closer to his mother. "You like my rocket," he said shyly. "I did. I used to draw rockets too, when I was your age." Andrew smiled. "Still do sometimes, during boring meetings." This earned him a giggle. Michelle got up to get Tommy some water, and the boy climbed into her empty chair, suddenly wide awake. "Do you know about the Mars rovers?" Tommy asked, his earlier shyness forgotten. "Some," Andrew replied. "But I bet you know more than me." What followed was an enthusiastic, if somewhat sleepy, explanation of Mars exploration, complete with sound effects for the rover's landing. Andrew listened intently, his heart swelling with each animated gesture and excited description. This was his son, brilliant, curious, and full of dreams. Michelle watched from the counter, her expression unreadable. When Tommy's words began to slow and his eyes started drooping, she gently suggested it was time to go back to bed. "Can Mr. Andrew come back tomorrow?" Tommy asked as Michelle picked him up. "He hasn't heard about the Jupiter moons yet." Michelle and Andrew's eyes met over Tommy's head. In that moment, they both knew there was no going back. The simple chance encounter at a coffee shop had set something in motion that would change all their lives forever. "We'll see, honey," Michelle said softly. "Let's get you to bed first." As Michelle put Tommy back to bed, Andrew stood in the kitchen, looking at the life he had missed out on, the life he desperately wanted to be part of now. When Michelle returned, they both knew the real conversation was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, Andrew found himself living 2 completely different lives. During the day, he was still the powerful CEO, making million-dollar decisions and steering his company through the complexities of the tech world. But his evenings had transformed into something precious and new. It started with casual visits to the park near Tommy's school. Michelle had agreed to let Andrew spend time with them, but only in public places, only with her present, and with one crucial condition: Tommy couldn't know the truth yet. They needed to build trust first, she insisted, and Andrew reluctantly agreed. One particularly sunny afternoon, Andrew sat on a park bench, watching Tommy climb the jungle gym. He had cancelled a video conference with investors in Tokyo for this, and for the first time in his career, he felt absolutely no regret about putting business second. "Higher, look how high I can go," Tommy called out, waving from the top of the climbing frame. Andrew's heart jumped to his throat, a natural parental instinct he didn't even know he possessed until now. "Be careful, buddy," he called back, earning an approving glance from Michelle. She had begun to relax around him, seeing how naturally he took to caring about Tommy's safety and happiness. "He's never taken to anyone like this before," Michelle said quietly, sitting beside Andrew. "Usually he's shy around new people, but with you." She left the sentence hanging. Andrew knew what she meant. Despite their careful planning, despite their attempts to control the situation, something natural and unstoppable was developing between him and Tommy. Blood calling to blood, perhaps, or simply the connection between two souls who shared the same dreams of rockets and stars. "I've been thinking," Michelle continued, watching Tommy now attempting to swing by himself. "Maybe it's time to tell him." Andrew's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure? He keeps asking about you. Yesterday, he wanted to know if you could come to his school's science fair next month. He's building a model solar system." She smiled softly. "It's not fair to either of you to keep pretending you're just a friendly stranger who happens to love space as much as he does." Before Andrew could respond, his phone buzzed. A news notification popped up: tech billionaire Andrew Chen spotted with mystery woman and child, new family in the making. Accompanied by a grainy photo of them at the park from last week. Michelle's face paled when he showed her the article. This was exactly what she had been afraid of: the media attention, the loss of privacy, the potential impact on Tommy's life. "I can handle this," Andrew said quickly. "I'll have my PR team." "Your PR team?" Michelle interrupted, her voice sharp. "This isn't a corporate crisis, Andrew. This is our son's life." The words hung between them, "our son," the first time she had said it out loud. Despite the tension of the moment, Andrew felt a warm glow in his chest at hearing those words. Tommy's voice broke through their conversation. "Mom. Andrew. Watch this." He was attempting to pump his legs on the swing, his face scrunched in concentration. They both turned to watch, their concern momentarily forgotten in the simple joy of watching their son learn something new. Andrew remembered his own mother teaching him to swing, her gentle voice explaining the rhythm of back and forth, the timing of when to push with your legs. "I have an idea," Andrew said suddenly. "But you might think it's crazy." Michelle raised an eyebrow, a familiar expression that brought back memories of their marriage, of quieter times before success had complicated everything. "I own a small island in the San Juans," he continued. "Very private, beautiful views of the stars at night. We could go there this weekend, just the three of us. No photographers, no interruptions. We could tell Tommy there, give him time to process everything in a peaceful place." He expected immediate rejection, but Michelle was quiet for a long moment, watching Tommy on the swing. "He's been begging to see the stars properly," she finally said. "His teacher said he was disappointed during their astronomy unit because you can't see many stars in the city. I have a telescope up there," Andrew added hopefully. "Professional grade. The kind that can show you Jupiter's moons." The mention of Jupiter's moons made Michelle smile. Tommy had been talking about them non-stop since his conversation with Andrew that night in the kitchen. "Okay," she said finally. "But we do this carefully. We tell him together, and we follow his lead. If it's too much for him, we back off." Andrew nodded, relief and anxiety mixing in his chest. As if sensing the importance of the moment, Tommy called out again. "I'm doing it. I'm swinging by myself." They both turned to watch him, his small face glowing with pride at his achievement. Andrew felt tears prick at his corners of his eyes. How many other first moments had he missed? First steps, first words, first day of school. But here he was now, watching his son learn to swing by himself, and somehow this moment felt as precious as any of those could have been. That evening, as Andrew sat in his empty penthouse, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He started to draw. Not financial projections or product designs, but rockets. A whole fleet of them, soaring across his notepad, each one carrying dreams and possibilities. He was no longer just drawing his own childhood dreams, but his son's as well. His phone buzzed again, another news alert about his mysterious park visits. But for once, he didn't care about what the media was saying. Let them speculate. The truth was far more beautiful than any story they could invent. He opened his laptop and began researching the best way to explain complex family situations to 5-year-olds. The articles he found were both encouraging and terrifying. Children were resilient, they said, but they needed stability, honesty, and most importantly, love. Love. It was strange how quickly and completely he had come to love Tommy. Not just as a responsibility or an obligation, but as a person, a bright spirit who saw the world with wonder and shared that wonder so freely. As he closed his laptop and walked to his window, the city lights spread out below him like a mirror of the stars above. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment, his son was probably dreaming of those same stars. Soon, very soon, they would watch them together, not as friendly strangers but as father and son. The weekend couldn't come fast enough. The small seaplane touched down on the calm waters near Andrew's private island just as the sun was beginning to set. Tommy's face was pressed against the window, his eyes wide with wonder at the adventure. He had been buzzing with excitement since Michelle had told him about their weekend trip to see the stars. "Look at all the trees!" Tommy exclaimed as they approached the dock. "It's like a jungle." His enthusiasm was contagious, making both adults smile despite their nervous anticipation of the conversation to come. The island house wasn't what Michelle had expected. Instead of the ultra-modern mansion she'd imagined, it was a cozy cedar lodge with large windows and a wraparound deck. Solar panels glinted on the roof, and a large telescope dome sat on a small hill behind the house. "I bought this place to get away from everything," Andrew explained as he carried their bags inside. "It's where I come to remember who I am when the world gets too loud." Tommy ran from room to room, exploring every corner with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old. He was especially excited about his bedroom, which Andrew had secretly prepared the day before, adding glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and space-themed bedding. "Mom! The stars glow just like in my room at home," Tommy called out, making both parents freeze for a moment. It was one of many little things Andrew had learned about his son's life through their park conversations, details he had carefully noted and remembered. As evening approached, Andrew prepared dinner while Michelle helped Tommy unpack. He could hear their voices drifting from the bedroom, Tommy's excited chatter about what constellations they might see, Michelle's gentle responses. It felt so natural, so right, that it made his chest ache. They ate on the deck, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Tommy had 1,000 questions about the island. Were there any animals? Could they go swimming? What was the dome on the hill for? "That's our surprise for later," Andrew told him, sharing a meaningful look with Michelle. They had agreed to wait until after dinner, after Tommy had time to settle into the new environment. As the last light faded from the sky, Andrew led them up to the observatory. Tommy's hand naturally slipped into his as they walked up the path, a simple gesture that nearly brought tears to his eyes. Michelle walked beside them, her face a mix of emotions in the growing darkness. The observatory was Andrew's pride and joy, though he hadn't visited it in months. As the dome opened with a soft whir, Tommy gasped at the sight of the massive telescope. "This is even bigger than the one at school," he exclaimed, running his hand carefully along the smooth metal surface. Andrew lifted Tommy up so he could look through the eyepiece, carefully adjusting the controls. "Look," he said softly. "That's Jupiter. And those tiny dots around it? Those are its moons." Tommy's excited squeal filled the dome. "I can see them. Mom, come look. It's just like in my books." For the next hour, they explored the night sky together. Andrew showed Tommy how to use the telescope controls, explaining everything with patience he never knew he possessed. Michelle watched them, seeing the identical expressions of wonder on their faces as they discovered each new celestial object. Finally, when Tommy had seen everything from Saturn's rings to distant star clusters, they sat on the observatory's floor, wrapped in warm blankets Andrew had brought up. The dome was open to the sky, and millions of stars twinkled above them. "Tommy," Michelle said gently, "there's something very important we need to tell you." Tommy looked up from where he was snuggled between them, his face serious at his mother's tone. "You know how some of your friends at school have both a mom and a dad?" Michelle began. Tommy nodded. "Like Ben. He has 2 houses because his mom and dad live in different places." "That's right," Michelle continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Well, you have a dad too." Tommy looked confused. "But you said my dad had to go away before I was born." "I did say that," Michelle acknowledged. "But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes they don't know things they should know." Andrew's heart was pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. Tommy looked between them, his young mind trying to process what was happening. "Tommy," Andrew said softly, "I'm your dad." The words hung in the star-filled air. Tommy stared at Andrew, then at his mother, then back at Andrew. His small face scrunched up in concentration, trying to make sense of this new information. "Is that why you like rockets too?" Tommy finally asked, his voice small but curious. A laugh that was half-sob escaped Andrew's throat. "Yes, buddy. That's one reason. And it's why you have dark eyes like mine, and why you stick out your tongue when you're concentrating, just like I do." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars. "Did you not want to be my dad before?" he asked, the question piercing Andrew's heart like an arrow. "No, Tommy," Andrew said quickly, fighting back tears. "I didn't know I was your dad. If I had known, I would have been there every day. I would have read you stories and taken you to school and shown you the stars much sooner. But now you know," Tommy said, with the simple logic of a child. "Now I know," Andrew confirmed. "And I want to be your dad now, if that's okay with you. We can take it slow, get to know each other better." Tommy seemed to consider this carefully. "Will you teach me more about the telescope?" "I'll teach you everything I know about telescopes, and rockets, and anything else you want to learn," Andrew promised. "And can I still live with Mom?" "Of course, sweetheart," Michelle assured him. "Nothing has to change if you don't want it to. We can just add more good things to your life." Tommy nodded, then did something that made both adults catch their breath. He reached out and took one of each of their hands, forming a circle under the stars. "I think I'd like having a dad," he said simply. "Especially one who knows about Jupiter's moons." Andrew squeezed his son's small hand gently, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance, witnesses to this moment of healing and new beginnings. They sat there for a long time, their small family circle complete for the first time, while Tommy pointed out all the constellations he could remember and made up stories about the ones he couldn't. In that moment, under the vast canopy of stars, the complications of their situation, the media attention, the logistics, the years of separation, all seemed to fade away. The morning after their stargazing revelation, Andrew woke up to the sound of quiet giggles and the smell of pancakes. Following the sounds to the kitchen, he found Tommy standing on a step stool next to Michelle, both of them covered in flour as they attempted to make pancakes in the shape of planets. "That one looks like Saturn." Tommy declared proudly, pointing to a slightly lopsided pancake with a thin ring of batter around it. When he spotted Andrew, his face lit up. "Dad! We're making space pancakes." The word "Dad" hit Andrew like a wave of warmth. It was the first time Tommy had called him that, and it came so naturally, so unexpectedly, that he had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. "Space pancakes, huh?" he managed to say, walking over to inspect their creations. "Looks like we have the whole solar system here." The morning passed in a blur of sticky syrup, attempted planet names, and more laughter than Andrew's island house had ever known. Tommy had adjusted to the news with the remarkable resilience of children, seemingly accepting this new reality with an open heart. Later that day, as they walked along the beach collecting shells, Tommy asked the question Andrew had been dreading: "Can I tell my friends at school that you're my dad?" Andrew and Michelle exchanged glances. They had discussed this late into the previous night after Tommy had fallen asleep. The media was already speculating about their relationship, and once the truth came out, Tommy's life would change forever. "Honey," Michelle began carefully, "remember how we talked about Andrew's job? About how some people like to take his picture and write stories about him?" Tommy nodded, adding another shell to his collection. "Because he builds computers and helps people?" "That's right," Andrew said, squatting down to Tommy's level. "And when people find out that you're my son, they might want to take your picture too, or ask you questions. Some people might treat you differently." Tommy considered this, his small face serious. "Like how Ben's friends only want to play at his house because he has a swimming pool." Andrew felt a surge of pride at his son's perceptiveness. "Exactly like that. So we need to be careful about who we tell and when we tell them. But that doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your dad, whether other people know it or not." That evening, as they packed to return to the city, Andrew noticed Tommy had grown quiet. He found the boy sitting on the deck, holding the telescope Andrew had bought him as a gift. "What's on your mind, buddy?" Andrew asked, sitting beside him. Tommy fiddled with the telescope's focus knob. "If you're my dad now, does that mean I have to be rich too?" The question caught Andrew off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard some big kids at school talking about rich people. They said rich kids are spoiled and nobody likes them." Tommy's voice was small. "I don't want my friends to stop liking me." Andrew felt his heart break a little. He had worried about paparazzi and public scrutiny, but he hadn't considered how his wealth might affect Tommy's relationships with his peers. "Listen to me," Andrew said gently. "Being rich or poor doesn't make you who you are. What matters is how you treat others and how you use what you have to help people. Your mom taught you that, right?" Tommy nodded. "She says we're lucky because we have enough, and we should always share with people who need help." "Your mom is very wise," Andrew smiled. "And you know what? That's exactly what I try to do with my money. I help build schools and hospitals, and I help other people start their own businesses." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? Like superhero stuff?" Andrew laughed. "Kind of, but without the cape. Would you like to help me with that someday? We could work together to figure out how to help people. Can we build a school with a really big telescope?" Tommy asked excitedly. "So all kids can see Jupiter's moons?" "That," Andrew said, pulling his son close, "is an excellent idea." The seaplane ride back to Seattle was bittersweet. Tommy fell asleep between them, clutching his new telescope. Michelle touched Andrew's arm gently. "He's going to be okay," she said softly. "We'll figure this out together." Back in the city, everything looked different to Andrew. His office building no longer seemed like a monument to his success, but rather a tool he could use to make the world better for his son. The media speculation about his mystery family no longer bothered him, let them wonder until they were ready to tell their story on their own terms. That week, Andrew made some significant changes. He moved his office hours to start early so he could finish in time to pick Tommy up from school twice a week. He hired a new PR team specifically to protect Tommy's privacy. And he started the paperwork to establish a new charitable foundation, one that would focus on building astronomy education centers in underprivileged schools. But the biggest change was in his heart. The empty penthouse began to fill with children's books about space, with half-finished Lego models, with drawings of rockets and stars. One wall of his home office became dedicated to Tommy's artwork, each new creation carefully framed like the masterpiece it was to a father's eyes. One evening, as he was leaving the office, his assistant handed him an envelope. Inside was an invitation to Tommy's school science fair, where he would be presenting his solar system model. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, Tommy had added, "To my dad, who knows about Jupiter's moons." Andrew ran his fingers over the words, remembering a time not so long ago when his biggest concern was quarterly earnings reports. Now, standing in his expensive suit in his prestigious office, he realized that his greatest achievement had nothing to do with business success. His phone buzzed with a message from Michelle, a photo of Tommy in his pajamas, setting up his telescope by his bedroom window, trying to spot stars through the city lights. The caption read, "Missing the island view. He wants to know when we can go back." Andrew smiled, already planning their next trip. There were so many stars left to show his son, so many wonders to explore together. The universe, it seemed, had given him a second chance at what really mattered in life. The day of Tommy's science fair arrived with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Andrew stood in front of his closet, deliberately choosing a simple sweater and jeans instead of his usual designer suit. Today, he wasn't attending as CEO Andrew Chen, but as Tommy's dad. Michelle had called him twice already that morning. Tommy had been up since dawn, making last-minute adjustments to his solar system model. The planets, carefully painted and hung with fishing line, orbited around a glowing sun he had made with Andrew's help during their weekend workspace sessions. "What if someone recognizes you?" Michelle asked when Andrew arrived at their apartment. She was helping Tommy pack his project into the car, each planet wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. "Then they recognize me," Andrew replied simply. "We knew this day would come. Besides, this is Tommy's moment. Nobody's going to care about some tech CEO when there are fifth graders demonstrating robot dogs." Tommy bounced out of the apartment, wearing his favorite NASA t-shirt and carrying a folder full of hand-drawn diagrams. "Dad, I added rings to Saturn last night. They're made of real gold glitter." Andrew's heart swelled. Over the past few weeks, he had watched Tommy work on this project with dedication that rivaled any startup founder he had ever mentored. They had spent evenings researching facts about each planet, weekends painting and constructing, and countless hours just talking about space. The school gymnasium was buzzing with excitement when they arrived. Tables lined with projects stretched in every direction, volcanoes, plant experiments, and yes, even a robot dog. Tommy's table was near the center, right under a skylight that would make his planet sparkle. As they set up the display, Andrew noticed other parents glancing their way. He heard whispers, saw phones being raised discreetly. But for once, he didn't care. He was too focused on helping Tommy arrange his planets in perfect orbital alignment. "Remember what we practiced?" Andrew asked as Tommy arranged his note cards. "Start with Mercury and work outward," Tommy recited. "Use my pointer stick for the far planets. And remember to breathe." "That's my boy," Andrew smiled, straightening Tommy's collar. The judges began their rounds, and Tommy stood proudly beside his project. Andrew and Michelle stepped back, watching as their son confidently explained the solar system to the impressed judges. His face lit up as he shared facts about each planet, his hands gesturing excitedly as he described the different orbital periods. "He gets that presentation style from you," Michelle whispered to Andrew. That thing he does with his hands when he's explaining something important? That's all you. Before Andrew could respond, he noticed a commotion near the gymnasium entrance. A local news crew had arrived, and they were heading straight for their table. Someone had tipped them off. Andrew's protective instincts kicked in. He started to move forward, ready to intervene, but Michelle grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said softly. "Look at Tommy." Their son was in the middle of explaining Jupiter's great red spot to the judges, completely absorbed in his presentation. The camera crew's presence hadn't fazed him at all, he was too excited about sharing his knowledge of space. The judges moved on, and the news crew approached. But before they could reach Tommy's table, something unexpected happened. Parents from Tommy's class formed a casual barrier, engaging the reporters in conversation, distracting them with other projects. Andrew recognized them from school pickup. The same parents who had been whispering earlier were now protecting Tommy's moment. "Mr. Reynolds' robot dog is really something," one mom said loudly to the camera crew. "You should definitely film that first." Tommy finally noticed the commotion and looked questioningly at his parents. Andrew walked over and knelt beside him. "There are some people here who might want to talk to us," he explained gently. "Remember what we discussed about this happening someday?" Tommy nodded, then surprised Andrew by taking his hand. "It's okay, Dad. I'm not scared. You're here." The simple trust in those words nearly brought Andrew to tears. Michelle joined them, and together they faced the approaching reporters. But before anyone could ask questions, Tommy spoke up. "Would you like to know about my solar system?" he asked brightly. "Did you know that Saturn's rings are made of ice and rock? And real gold glitter," he added with a proud glance at his model. The reporter, caught off guard by Tommy's enthusiasm, lowered her microphone. "I'd love to hear about your solar system," she said warmly. For the next 10 minutes, Tommy gave his presentation again, this time to a growing crowd of parents, students, and yes, news cameras. But he wasn't talking about being Andrew Chen's son or about his newfound connection to a tech billionaire. He was talking about planets and stars, about orbital patterns and atmospheric compositions, about his dreams of building rockets someday. When the winners were announced, Tommy's project won second place. The robot dog got first, but Tommy didn't mind. He was too excited about his silver medal and the special commendation for most passionate presentation. That evening, as they celebrated with pizza at Michelle's apartment, Andrew's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. The story had broken: tech billionaire's secret son wins hearts with solar system project. But the headlines didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Tommy, sitting at the kitchen table, already sketching ideas for his next science project. What mattered was the way he looked up at Andrew and asked, "Can we use the big telescope again next weekend? I want to study Venus this time." Later, after Tommy had gone to bed with his medal proudly displayed next to his model planets, Andrew and Michelle sat on her small balcony, looking up at the city sky where only the brightest stars were visible. "You know what this means," Michelle said quietly. "Everything changes now." Andrew nodded. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time for the world to know that I'm more than just the tech guy. That I'm Tommy's dad first." "He handled it all so well today," Michelle mused. "No fear, no hesitation. Just pure excitement about sharing what he loves." "He gets that courage from you," Andrew said softly. "You raised him to be strong, to be himself no matter what." Inside the apartment, Tommy's model planets cast gentle shadows on the walls, the glitter on Saturn's rings catching the light just so. Tomorrow, there would be more reporters, more questions, more adjustments to make. But tonight, in this moment, they were just a family, brought together by love and united by a 5-year-old's passion for the stars. 1 year had passed since the science fair that changed everything. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Andrew's penthouse as he helped Tommy adjust his bow tie. They were preparing for a very special event, the grand opening of the Chen Family Space Education Center. "Is everyone from my class really coming?" Tommy asked, fidgeting with excitement. "The whole school," Andrew confirmed, smoothing Tommy's collar. "And kids from 10 other schools too. Remember why we built this place? So all kids can see Jupiter's moons," Tommy replied with a proud smile. "Even if they don't have their own telescope." The past year had been a whirlwind of changes. After the science fair video went viral, Andrew and Michelle had faced the challenge of protecting Tommy while not hiding him away. Their solution came from Tommy himself, who had asked one evening, "If we have enough money to build computers, why can't we build telescopes for other kids?" That simple question had sparked something amazing. Andrew had purchased an old planetarium building, and together with Tommy, they had transformed it into a state-of-the-art space education center. Every decision, from the interactive exhibits to the massive observatory dome, had been influenced by Tommy's ideas and experiences. Michelle walked in, already dressed for the ceremony. She had taken a position as the center's education director, combining her teaching experience with their shared vision of making space science accessible to all children. "The press is already gathering outside," she said, adjusting Tommy's perpetually messy hair. "Are you ready for this, sweetie?" Tommy nodded confidently. The past year had taught him how to handle attention with grace. He had his father's natural charm and his mother's genuine warmth, a combination that made him a perfect ambassador for their family's new mission. They rode together to the center, Tommy's face pressed against the car window as they approached the building. The modern glass structure sparkled in the morning light, its dome gleaming like a second sun. A crowd had gathered, families, school groups, reporters, and dignitaries. "Look!" Tommy pointed excitedly. "Ben's here. And Lisa. And Mr. Thompson brought the robot dog." Indeed, Tommy's entire class had come to support him, along with the robot dog creator who had won first place at the science fair. The dog now had a permanent exhibit at the center, programmed to guide young visitors through the solar system display. As they stepped out of the car, cameras flashed, but Tommy barely noticed. He was too busy waving to his friends and pointing out features of the building to anyone who would listen. "The dome is exactly 50 feet wide," he explained to a group of reporters. "That's so we can fit 2 whole classes inside at once. And see those panels? They're solar-powered, just like the ones on Dad's island." Andrew stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd. Michelle and Tommy sat in the front row, both beaming with pride. This was so different from his usual tech company presentations. Today, he wasn't talking about profit margins or market share, he was talking about dreams. "A year ago," he began, "my life changed forever when I discovered I had a son. But Tommy didn't just bring love and joy into my life, he reminded me of something I had forgotten. He reminded me of the little boy who once looked up at the stars and dared to dream big." Andrew gestured to the building behind him. "This center isn't just about telescopes and exhibits. It's about possibilities. Every child who walks through these doors will have the chance to see something amazing, whether it's the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, or their own potential reflected back at them." Tommy joined him at the podium, standing on a step stool they had placed there for this moment. "And we have real meteorites," he added enthusiastically into the microphone, making everyone laugh. The ceremony continued with the official ribbon cutting, performed jointly by Tommy and the city mayor. As the doors opened, children rushed in, their excited voices filling the space with energy and wonder. Inside, Andrew watched as Tommy led his friends through the exhibits, explaining each one with expertise and enthusiasm. The centerpiece was the Journey Through Space room, where children could lie on comfortable cushions while the ceiling transformed into a detailed view of the cosmos. "You've built something remarkable here," Michelle said, joining him as they watched Tommy demonstrate the controls of a mock spacecraft to his classmates. "We built it," Andrew corrected her. All three of us. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone and the cameras had left, the family stood in the observatory dome. Tommy was at the controls of the main telescope, proudly showing his parents a clear view of Venus. "Dad?" Tommy asked, not looking up from the eyepiece. "Yes, buddy? Remember when you said you didn't know about me when I was born?" Andrew's heart tightened. "Yes, I remember. I think maybe that was okay," Tommy said thoughtfully. "Because if you had known, you might have been busy with baby stuff instead of building your company. And then we couldn't have built this place for other kids." Andrew and Michelle exchanged amazed looks at their son's wisdom. Tommy continued adjusting the telescope's focus as he spoke. "Plus, Mom did a really good job. And now I get to have both of you, and a space center, and lots of kids who can see the stars. That's better than just having a regular dad from the beginning." Andrew pulled Tommy into a tight hug, tears threatening to spill from his eyes. Michelle joined them, and they stood together, their small family circle complete under the dome of their shared dream. Through the open dome, the first stars of evening were becoming visible. Somewhere out there, Jupiter was rising, its moons dancing their eternal dance. But the greatest wonder wasn't in the sky above them, it was in the love that had brought them together, in the dream they had built, and in the legacy they would leave for generations of young stargazers to come. "So," Tommy said, breaking the emotional moment with his usual enthusiasm, "when are we building one on the island?" Andrew laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "One step at a time, buddy. One step at a time." But they all knew that with Tommy's dreams and determination, with Michelle's wisdom and guidance, and with Andrew's resources and support, this was just the beginning of their journey together. The universe was vast, full of endless possibilities, just waiting to be explored by a family who had found each other under the eternal dance of the stars.